The scanner's light crawled up his ribs and stopped where it had no business stopping. Cale Voss sat shirtless on the cold gel table, breath shallow, tape still wound around both hands because no one had told him to take it off. The hollow overlay hung in the air above his chest, a thin blue map of bone and old damage. The medic's fingers hovered over the controls and did not move. "Your range of motion should be compromised," she said. Her voice had the flat calm of someone trying not to sound surprised. "It isn't." Cale said nothing. He watched the readout blink red at his right forearm, steady itself, then blink again, as if the machine didn't trust its own numbers. Behind the medic, Commander Ilith Vosk stood with her sash crooked from running, her mandibles clicking twice fast, the sound she made when the world stopped matching her files. She scanned the overlay. She frowned at the ridges along his elbow. She said nothing. No one in the room finished a sentence. The silence wasn't pity. It was the sound of an institution finding out it had misfiled something 6 hours ago and was only now opening the drawer. "Do all humans tolerate pain like this?" the medic asked, quieter now, like she wasn't sure she wanted the answer in front of the commander. Cale's jaw tightened as the ice wrap on his ribs cycled cold again. He thought about the dorm pod, the corridor, the mat, the sound a knee makes when it stops being a knee. He thought about 6 days of being called soft-bodied. "Some of us better than others," he said. "It's not magic." He didn't finish. The room held its breath waiting for the rest, and that's where it would have to stay, because none of them, not the medic, not the commander, not the cadet currently being wheeled past the door screaming about hidden weapons, understood yet what they were looking at. What he showed her that day, no academy record had a category for. Stay with him. You'll want to see exactly how he got onto that table. 6 days earlier, the transport had no scanner and no silence. Only the rattle of re-entry through Keth Miner's thin shield layer and a duffel bag Cale refused to check, even when the loading officer told him 3 times that personal effects went in the hold. "It's tape," Cale said. "I'm keeping it." The transport shuddered through the final shield, and Cale stared down at a facility that looked more like a sentence than a school, domes the color of rust, sunk into Nicolean rock, linked by mag-trams that moved like veins under grey skin. No green, no sky, just steel-breathing recycled air. He'd been called soft-bodied, diplomatic baggage, a curiosity, 3 different times in 3 different briefings before he ever set foot on the shuttle. In 6 hours, the room that mattered most would learn what soft-bodied meant. He didn't know that yet. He just knew his knuckles ached from the cold, and his hands hadn't stopped wrapping themselves around something invisible since the airlocks cycled open. Commander Ilith met him at the rail with a posture that had clearly greeted 40 other arrivals that month, and found all of them disappointing in slightly different ways. "Voss," she said, reading his name off a slate instead of looking at him. "Embassy security, self-taught." Her mandibles clicked. "The Coalition admitted your species 8 months ago. You are, as far as my instructors are concerned, a diplomatic gesture wearing a body." "I'm aware," Cale said. "Then we understand each other." She didn't extend a hand, claw, or anything resembling welcome. Orientation briefing is at first cycle. Try not to embarrass the gesture. She left him standing in a corridor built for things twice his height, holding a bag with tape in it that nobody on this rock would understand the weight of. The dorm pod smelled like ozone and somebody else's sweat. Cale's bunk was a thermal mesh cradle sized for a body with more joints than his, and the 3 cadets, already inside, didn't bother lowering their voices when he walked in. A lean creature with ash-grey, algae-textured skin tilted its head almost sideways, the way someone might study a stain on a wall. That was Corin, though Cale wouldn't get the name for another day. Beside her, something with quartz-veined slate skin sat in total stillness, watching him the way a sensor watches a room. And near the door, a narrow shape with vertical pupils kept its tail curled tight around one ankle, the universal body language for nervous. Nobody spoke to him, nobody needed to. The silence said it plainly enough. Soft-bodied, unarmored, doesn't belong. He found his cradle, set his bag down, and didn't unpack the tape. Some things you don't put in a drawer where strangers can see them yet. The corridor outside, the mess hall, was narrower than the others, and that was the problem. A shadow filled it first, wide, plated, stretching across the floor a full 2 seconds before its owner did. Brack Dawn turned the corner like he owned the air in front of him, dorsal ridges clicking with each step, three-fingered, hands the size of mallets swinging loose at his sides. He stopped Cale with one arm, flat against the bulkhead, not touching him, just blocking everything past it. "You're the soft one," Brack said. Ammonia sharpened the air around him, the smell every cadet learned to read as agitation. "I don't think you belong here." "Noted," Cale said. 14 wins in the ring. You know what that number means to me." Brack leaned in until his breath fogged faintly against the cold air. "It means I don't lose." Cale's eyes flicked once fast to the black dome of a security camera mounted above the bulkhead. Brack's gaze followed his, and the arm came down half a second later, almost lazy, like it had never been a threat at all. "Walk," Brack said. Cale walked. He didn't look back, and he didn't run his shoulder under hot water that night, even though it ached from where the bulkhead had caught it on the way past. He went to the service bay instead, empty, unlit except for 2 amber maintenance lamps, and started on footwork nobody had asked him to do. Slide, pivot, plant. Slide, pivot, plant. His boots scraped the deck in a rhythm that had nothing to do with this academy and everything to do with a wrestling mat half a galaxy away and a dirt bike before that, and every other time his body had decided to break instead of quit. He sat down between sets and unwound the old tape from his duffel, frayed grey synth fibre, stained dark at the knuckles, soft from use in a way nothing on this station was. He wound it twice around his right hand. The fibers caught on a callous ridge he'd earned years before he'd ever heard the word crucible. Bone remembers what it survives, he thought, an old line from a sports doctor he hadn't seen in a decade. Break it clean, let it heal, and it comes back denser than it started. Nobody designs a body to do that on purpose. It just happens to the ones who keep getting back up. He flexed his fingers inside the wrap and looked at the door, half expecting Brack's shadow to fill it again. It didn't. Just the hum of the station, and somewhere down the corridor, the soft mechanical click of a camera resetting its angle, recording an empty room that wouldn't stay empty for long. He didn't sleep. He never told anyone that, not even later, when it would have made a better story. He drilled until his calves burned, wrapped his shoulder again, and lay in the thermal cradle staring at a ceiling that wasn't his, running the corridor with Brack over and over until the shape of it stopped meaning anything. First cycle came with a klaxon instead of a sunrise. The combat arena was a flat ring of dark composite floor, 4 sensor mats glowing faint blue at the edges, ringed by tiered seating that filled fast with bodies of every shape the Coalition had bothered to admit. Commander Illith stood at the center on a raised dais, sash straight now, voice carrying without effort across 1,000 mandibles and ears and whatever Tenari used to hear. "No weapons," she said. "No augmentations. No armor enhancements beyond what your species was issued at birth." Her compound eyes swept the rows. "The warrior is the weapon. Anything less than that, and you've already lost before the match starts." Cale stood near the back, arms folded, tape already wound. Somewhere to his left, Corin leaned close and whispered, "She says that every cycle. Nobody believes it anymore." "I do," Cale said. Corin tilted her head at him, the same sideways tilt from the dorm pod, like she was trying to find the angle where he made sense. She didn't get the chance to ask why. The pairing board lit up overhead, names scrolling in a script Cale was still learning to read, and a name he could read settled next to his. BIKK Dawn, KALVOSS. The arena laughed. Not all of it, but enough. A wave of clicks and chitters, and one low, rolling sound from somewhere in the Korath section that might have been the closest thing to a laugh their throats could make. Someone near the front shouted a number, a wager on how many seconds Cale would last, and 3 more voices shouted numbers back, lower each time. Brack didn't laugh. He just looked at Cale across the ring with the flat satisfaction of a problem that had already solved itself. 14 wins, he said, loud enough for the tears to hear. Make it 15 quick. I have somewhere to be. Illith's mandibles clicked once sharp. Take positions. Cale stepped onto the mat. The blue glow under his boots pulsed once, calibrating to a mass and density it clearly hadn't expected from something his size. And for half a second the sensor stuttered, a flicker nobody but Cale seemed to notice. He filed it away and didn't look up at the tears again. Brack came in low and fast, plating clicking with every stride. 300 pounds of momentum aimed at the center of Cale's chest, like the room had already decided where this would end. It didn't end there. Cale went sideways instead of back, close enough that the air off Brack's shoulder dragged at his shirt, and dropped his weight into the turn. His boot caught the back of Brack's trailing knee and swept through it. There was a sound like a green branch giving way, and the leg that had carried 14 wins folded sideways in a direction knees on this station weren't built to bend. Brack roared. The crowd's noise died into something thinner, more uncertain. Cale didn't stop moving. That was the part nobody in the stands understood yet, that stopping was the mistake, that every fight he'd ever survived had taught him the same lesson twice. Hesitation is the only injury you can't heal from. He ducked under the wounded lunge that followed, spun in behind the dorsal ridge plating, and climbed it the way he'd climb a wall that wanted to kill him. His grip found the joint under the left shoulder. He twisted. The snap was loud enough that half the arena flinched. Brack's arm dropped, dead weight, and his scream this time wasn't rage. It was the sound of a body learning a fact its owner hadn't agreed to. He swung anyway, a wild backhand off the working arm, and Cale didn't see it coming fast enough to fully clear it. It caught him low in the ribs and lifted him off his feet. He hit the mat hard enough to lose the room for half a second, white at the edges of his vision, lungs refusing to find air. He got up anyway. That was the part the cameras would replay for weeks, not the fight, the standing up. Up in the tiers, a Tenari cadet went very still, the kind of stillness Rithar's species used instead of gasping. Down near the rail, Fenn's tail tightened so hard around an ankle it left a mark. And on the dais, Illith's mandibles had stopped clicking entirely, which was worse, because it meant she'd stopped having a reaction prepared. Brack came at him one more time, favoring the dead leg, swinging the working arm in a wide arc meant to end things by sheer mass. Cale read the swing 2 beats before it finished, slipped under it, and drove both elbows up into the inner joint of that arm, exactly where Corin's species would have called it brittle. It went the way bone goes, when something has already decided how this ends. The arena had stopped making sound altogether. Brack folded to the mat in pieces that didn't move the way they were supposed to, breath rattling out of him in short, furious bursts, and Cale stood over him with his chest heaving and his ribs screaming and his hands, still wrapped, still steady, hanging loose at his sides like he hadn't just taken a body twice his size apart with nothing but leverage and a body that refused to quit. The silence lasted exactly as long as it took Brack to find his voice again. Tech, he wheezed, spitting the word like it tasted wrong. He's got tech in him. Nobody does that bare-handed. Scan him. Scan HIM. Illith was already moving before the second shout finished, sash snapping behind her as she crossed the ring, and the look on her face wasn't anger anymore. It was the look of someone running through every protocol she'd ever memorized and finding none of them filed under this. Full diagnostic, she said to the medics flooding the mat. Now, before he sets foot off this ring. Cale didn't fight them. He let them guide him toward the door at the edge of the arena, ribs aching with every breath, and as the crowd noise finally broke back open behind him, confused, furious, disbelieving, all three at once, he caught one clear voice cutting through the rest. Corin's, pitched low, not laughing anymore. That wasn't 14 wins he just lost to, she said to no one in particular. That was something else. Behind the medics on the dais, Illith stood very still for one more second, staring at the spot on the mat where Brack had gone down. Then she turned and followed them toward medbay, already drafting in her head the report she had no template for. The door sealed behind them. Somewhere past it, a scanner was already warming up, about to show her exactly how wrong every file on this station had been. The scanner's hum filled the silence before Ilith's voice did. "Stripped to the waist," the lead medic said, not unkindly, already keying the diagnostic panel awake. Bioluminescent strips along the ceiling brightened in response, painting the room the pale blue-green of something trying very hard to look harmless. Cale pulled the tape off his hands first. He set it on the counter beside him, careful, the way someone sets down a thing they don't want to lose track of, and climbed onto the table. Brack was 3 berths down, sedated, his left arm and right elbow both sealed in cold cast, his dorsal plating clicking weakly even in sleep. Nobody had answered his accusation yet. That was the point of the next 2 minutes. The scanner's arm swept once across Cale's chest, slow, and the hollow overlay bloomed in the air above him. A thin blue skeleton, lit from the inside, every joint glowing where the machine found something to measure. The medic's hand hovered over the readout and stopped. "No foreign matter," she said. She said it again, quieter, like the words needed a second pass before she'd trust them. "No foreign matter detected. All impact trauma consistent with natural anatomy." Ilith's mandibles went still, not clicking, just still, the way a machine goes still right before it reboots. "Run it again," she said. They ran it again. The result came back the same, and this time the medic turned the overlay toward the commander herself, tracing one claw along a series of pale ridges at the elbow, the wrist, 2 long lines down the right femur. "These aren't new," the medic said. "These are old, healed, some of them years old." Cale lay still under the light, ribs wrapped, hands finally empty of tape, and said the only thing he'd come into this academy already knowing how to say. "I used what I was born with." His voice was flat, not proud, just tired in the specific way of someone who has explained himself too many times to people who weren't listening. "These are my weapons." Nobody answered that right away. Outside the door, word had already started moving faster than the medics could contain it. 140 cadets had watched a 14-time ring champion get taken apart in 29 seconds by something with no plating, no claws, and apparently no tech, and word like that doesn't wait for an official report. The medic counted them out loud, partly for the record, partly because she clearly needed to hear it twice to believe it. 11 prior fractures, 3 joint dislocations, calcified ridges denser than the bone around them, like scar tissue had decided to outdo the original. "When did you sustain these?" she asked. "High school, a bike, a wrestling match before that." Cale shrugged, and the motion pulled at his ribs enough that he stopped doing it. "I didn't come here because any of it was safe." Ilith hadn't moved from the foot of the table. When she finally spoke, it wasn't to Cale. It was to the medic, low, the tone of someone filing a thought away before it could get away from her. "Pull the footage from his corridor pass 2 nights ago. All of it." The medic blinked, confused by the pivot, but typed the request anyway. Cale's stomach went tight, though his face didn't show it. He hadn't told anyone about the corridor. He hadn't needed to. The camera had already seen it, the same way it had seen everything, and apparently somebody on this station had finally decided that footage was worth pulling. He didn't ask why. He'd learn why soon enough, and not in a way that would feel like good news. The mess hall the next morning was quieter than it had ever been, which Cale decided was its own kind of answer. Cadets who'd laughed at the pairing board 2 days ago now chose seats farther down the bench, not out of disgust this time, but something closer to a kind of careful uncertainty, like nobody had updated their training on how to sit near him. Corin sat across from him anyway. She set her tray down without asking, which from her was its own kind of statement. "You sound more like a weapon than a person," she said, tilting her head at the angle she used when she was actually thinking instead of just performing curiosity. Only when I have to be, Kale said. Is that a comfortable way to live? He thought about it longer than the question probably deserved. It's the only way I know how. Corin's eyes, pale, slit-pupilled, built for catching motion at a distance, settled on the bruising along his jaw, then dropped to his hands, still faintly swollen at the knuckles even 2 days out. Brittle and fragile aren't the same word, she said finally. I think your species has been calling itself the second one by mistake. It wasn't praise, exactly. It landed like something closer to data, filed and shared because she thought it mattered. Kale didn't have anything to say back that wouldn't sound smaller than what she just handed him, so he didn't try. She left before he finished eating. That was Corin's way of ending a conversation, not a goodbye, just an absence where a presence had been, the same quick adaptability she brought to everything. 6 days. That was the suspension Illith handed down by midday, posted to his slate without a hearing, without a chance to argue it. No matches, pending review. The wording was careful, bureaucratic, the kind of language built to protect an institution rather than explain it. Kale read it twice in the empty service bay, tape back on his hands out of habit more than need, and didn't argue it either. Arguing assumed the system was listening. He wasn't sure yet that it was. What he didn't see, what nobody outside one office on this station saw, was Illith alone at her terminal that same night, the corridor footage looping in front of her for the 4th time. Brack's arm extended. Kale's eyes flicking to the camera. Brack's arm dropping a half-second later, the exact moment the threat folded itself back into a shrug for the recording. She froze the frame there and stared at it for a long time. It wasn't the footage of the fight that unsettled her. The fight, at least, had a winner and a scan to explain it. This was smaller and worse. A cadet under her command who had clocked a threat, clocked a camera, and chosen to walk away instead of escalating, not because he was weak, she now understood, but because he'd already known exactly what he could do if he didn't. That wasn't the profile of a diplomatic gesture. That was the profile of someone who'd spent years deciding, every single day, not to use what he had. She pulled up the Academy handbook next, scrolled to the species addenda, and stared for a long moment at the blank line under human threat classification. Pending review. 8 months of admission, and nobody had filled that line in yet, because nobody had thought there was anything to fill it with. She did not fill it in that night either. She just sat with the cursor blinking over the gap, and for the first time since taking this command, Commander Illith Vosk admitted to herself that her files were not just incomplete. They were wrong. The suspension lifted on the 6th day, posted to Kale's slate with the same flat bureaucratic wording it had arrived with, no apology, no explanation. Just match privileges reinstated, stamped above a list of cleared opponents that hadn't existed the week before. Rithar's name was first on it. They met in the smaller training ring, the one with softer mats and no tiered seating, just a handful of cadets who'd asked to watch instead of being sent. Rithar's quartz-veined skin caught the overhead light in thin lines, and when they bowed, actual bow, slow and formal, Kale bowed back without thinking about it, the way you answer a greeting in a language you didn't know you'd learned. Your restraint is measured, Rithar said, voice carrying in long harmonic tones like 2 notes played at once. I would like to test it, not survive it. That's the idea, Kale said. I'm sore, also trying to stay enrolled. The match that followed wasn't fast. It wasn't supposed to be. Rithar moved with the patience of stone, deciding to be water, testing angles instead of forcing them, and Kale matched the pace without once reaching for the speed that had ended Brack's night in 2 pieces. He blocked. He redirected. He let 2 takedown attempts slide past him rather than punish them. When the round ended, nobody was carried out, and nobody screamed for a scanner. Controlled, Rithar said afterward, studying him with something that wasn't quite respect yet, but was no longer suspicion either. I did not expect that from someone who dismantled a Korath champion in 29 seconds. He kept coming, Kale said. You didn't have to. It was the truest thing he'd said since the scan, and saying it out loud surprised him a little. that the difference between the two fights had never been about what he could do. It had only ever been about what the moment asked for. A message came through that evening on the Medcast feed, sent to Cale's slate from a recovery bay 3 corridors over. Brack's voice, rougher than before, his arms still in cold cast, the dorsal plating clicking slower now, the fight gone out of it. "We misunderstood your kind," Brack said. No preamble, no apology dressed up as anything else. "I called it tech because the alternative made less sense to me than cheating did." "Good," Cale said, recording his reply standing in the empty service bay, tape on his hands out of habit. "Now we can move forward." He didn't send anything longer than that. Some things didn't need more words than they were given. The evaluation with senior instructor Dren came 2 days later, and it was nothing like the others. No crowd, no pairing board, just a quiet circle of mats and a Dren class instructor whose movements carried the unhurried precision of someone who had stopped needing to prove anything decades ago. They traded holds for the better part of an hour, technical, exact, neither one chasing a finish. When Dren finally caught Cale in a lock that should have ended things, and Cale worked free of it through nothing but angle and patience, the instructor actually paused, studying the escape like a problem worth keeping. "You're dangerous, Voss," Dren said, releasing the hold. "Only when needed," Cale answered. "That's the most dangerous kind." Neither of them called a winner. Some matches existed to teach, not to settle anything, and both of them understood that without saying it. Ilith posted the handbook revision the following morning. No announcement, no ceremony, just a new line appended quietly to the species addenda where Cale had once watched a cursor blink over an empty gap. Species Note 23b. While unarmed, humans may not be considered non-lethal. Threat classification: variable, contingent on demonstrated restraint. It wasn't praise. It wasn't an apology either. It was an institution doing the only thing institutions know how to do when they're wrong, quietly editing the file and moving on, hoping the correction speaks for itself. Cale read it once in the mess hall, said nothing, and went back to his protein block. That evening, he cleared out his locker of everything he didn't need anymore: the cold gel packs, the spare sensor tabs, 6 days of accumulated academy clutter, and stood for a moment with the old tape in his hand. Frayed grey synth fiber, dark at the knuckles, soft from years of use, the same wrap that had caught on a callus before he'd ever heard the word crucible. He didn't need it tonight. His hands didn't ache the way they had that first week. He hung it on the inside locker hook instead of packing it, the way you leave a door unlocked for someone who might need it more than you do, and walked out without looking back. The next morning, a Korath cadet he didn't recognize was standing near the lockers when he passed, a strip of frayed grey fiber wound once around her wrist. She wasn't wearing it like armor. She was wearing it like a question she hadn't finished asking yet. What does it mean to break and come back stronger than you started? Cale didn't explain it to her. He didn't think it was his to explain anymore. He found Corin in the mess hall later that week, trading her insulation foam joke for a real one this time, and Fen had finally stopped wrapping his tail quite so tight around his ankle whenever Cale walked past. Small things. The kind that don't make it into any handbook and don't need to. 6 months from now, there would be other humans on this station, and they would walk into a system that already had a line for them, already knew, in its slow, institutional way, what to expect. Cale wouldn't be the only diplomatic gesture wearing a body anymore. He'd just be the first file in a drawer that finally had a category. He didn't think about that walking back to the dorm pod that night. He thought about his shoulder, which didn't hurt anymore, and his ribs, which mostly didn't, and the printout from the handbook revision he'd folded once and tucked into the side pocket of his bag, not to prove anything to anyone. Just to remember, on the days he needed it, what 11 old breaks had finally been worth. The dorm pod was quiet when he got there. The thermal mesh cradle had been reset to a temperature closer to what his body actually needed, a small adjustment nobody had announced, but somebody had clearly made. He lay down, without wrapping his hands. Outside the viewport, Keth Miner's grey rock curved away into starlight, and somewhere down the corridor, a strip of old grey tape sat on a stranger's wrist, still catching the light the same way it always had.